The house smelled like lavender and lemon polish, a scent that had clung to the walls ever since my father remarried 2 years ago. It was a comforting aroma, one I associated with order and stability, things I desperately needed after Mom passed away when I was 16. But tonight, as I stood in the kitchen unpacking groceries, the familiar fragrance felt suffocating, like an invisible hand pressing down on my chest. My life had become a series of small routines, predictable and safe, but also achingly lonely. I just turned 24 last month, though it didn't feel much different from 23 or even 22. Life moved forward, sure, but for me, it often felt like treading water. Work consumed most of my days. I was a junior graphic designer at a mid-sized marketing firm, where deadlines loomed large and creativity sometimes felt more like a chore than a passion. Outside of work, there wasn't much else. Friends drifted in and out of my orbit, their lives growing fuller, while mine stayed stagnant. And then there was Dad's new wife, Claire. Claire wasn't what you'd call warm exactly, but she wasn't cold either. She existed somewhere in between, a quiet presence who kept the household running smoothly without demanding too much attention. At first, I resented her. How could anyone step into Mom's shoes? But over time, resentment gave way to indifference. We coexisted peacefully enough, sharing polite nods and occasional small talk about dinner plans or weekend errands. Still, there was always this unspoken distance between us, a line neither of us seemed willing, or maybe able, to cross. That evening, as I stacked cans of soup into the pantry, Claire walked in carrying a basket of laundry. Her movements were efficient, almost mechanical, as if every gesture had been rehearsed countless times before. She wore her usual uniform, dark jeans, a fitted sweater, and those soft leather slippers she favored around the house. Her blonde hair was tied back in a loose bun, stray wisps framing her face in a way that made her look softer somehow, less guarded. For a brief moment, I caught myself staring, not because she was particularly striking, but because something about her posture struck me as weary. Fragile, even. "Need any help?" she asked, her voice low and steady, breaking through my thoughts. "No, thanks," I replied quickly, turning back to the groceries to avoid meeting her eyes. "Almost done." She lingered for a second longer than necessary, hovering near the doorway as if debating whether to say more. Then, with a slight nod, she disappeared upstairs, leaving behind only the faint creak of floorboards underfoot. It wasn't until later, lying awake in bed, that I realized how little I actually knew about her. Sure, I knew the basics. She worked part-time as a yoga instructor, preferred green tea over coffee, and liked to garden on weekends. But beyond that, nothing. Not really. There was a whole world inside Claire that remained closed off to me, and maybe that was fine. After all, we weren't supposed to be close. She was my stepmother, not my confidant. Yet, as I stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of crickets outside my window, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important lay just beneath the surface, something waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting golden stripes across my bedroom floor. I groaned, rolling onto my side to check the time on my phone. 7:30. Too early to get up, but too late to fall back asleep. With a sigh, I dragged myself out of bed and shuffled downstairs, still half asleep. The kitchen was empty, save for the faint scent of toast lingering in the air. Claire must have already eaten and left for her morning class. A note sat propped against the coffee maker. "Made fresh brew. Help yourself." I poured a cup and leaned against the counter, sipping slowly as I stared out the window. The backyard looked peaceful, dew glistening on the grass, birds flitting between branches. It was moments like these that reminded me why I stayed here, despite everything. This house held memories, good ones, bad ones, but they were mine. They anchored me, even when the rest of my life felt adrift. I rinsed my mug and placed it in the sink. A sudden noise startled me, a soft thud followed by the sound of footsteps coming from upstairs. My heart skipped a beat. Claire should have been long gone by now. Who else could it be? Curiosity got the better of me. I crept toward the staircase, each step creaking slightly beneath my weight. When I reached the landing, I froze. The door to Claire's room was ajar, light spilling into the hallway. Through the crack, I could see her silhouette moving back and forth, folding clothes on the bed. Something about the scene felt intimate, private, as if I'd stumbled upon a moment meant only for her. And yet, I couldn't look away. There was a grace to her movements, a quiet elegance that I hadn't noticed before. Her hands worked deftly, smoothing wrinkles from fabric with practiced ease. For a split second, our eyes met through the gap in the doorframe. Hers widened in surprise, then softened almost immediately. Neither of us spoke. Instead, she offered a small smile, one that lingered just long enough to make my stomach flutter, and returned to her task. I retreated to my room, my pulse racing for reasons I couldn't quite explain. What was happening to me? Why did such a simple exchange leave me so unsettled? As I sank onto the edge of my bed, one thought refused to leave my mind. Claire wasn't just my stepmother. She was a person, complex and layered, with secrets and desires of her own. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to know them. By the time I arrived at work later that day, my mind was elsewhere. Colleagues greeted me with cheerful hellos, but their voices sounded distant, muffled, like echoes in a dream. I nodded absently, forcing smiles that felt brittle and false. Even during meetings, I struggled to focus, my thoughts drifting back to the image of Claire folding laundry, her expression unreadable yet undeniably magnetic. "You okay, Em?" Sarah, my coworker and closest friend at the office, asked during lunch. "You seem distracted." "I'm fine," I lied, stirring my salad absent-mindedly. "Just tired." Sarah raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. Instead, she launched into a story about her latest dating app disaster, complete yet another guy ghosting her after 3 dates. Normally, I would have laughed along, offering sympathy and advice. Today, though, her words barely registered. All I could think about was Claire. The curve of her lips, the way her fingers brushed against the fabric, the intensity of her gaze when she caught me watching her. Later that afternoon, as I sat hunched over my desk sketching mock-ups for a client project, my phone buzzed with a text notification. It was Claire, leftovers in the fridge for dinner. "Hope your day is going well." My thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating. Should I respond? What would I even say? Finally, I typed out a quick reply. "Thanks. Have a good class." Her response came almost instantly. "Will do. See you tonight." For some reason, those 3 words sent a shiver down my spine. Tonight. The word hung in the air, heavy with possibility. What awaited me when I returned home? Would things go back to normal, or had something shifted irreversibly? As the hours ticked by, I found myself counting down the minutes until I could leave the office. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, I practically sprinted to my car, eager to escape the confines of my cubicle and return to the place where answers, however elusive, might finally reveal themselves. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for a single light glowing in the living room. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of freshly baked bread. Claire sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, reading a book. She glanced up as I entered, her expression calm but curious. "How was your day?" she asked, setting the book aside. "Fine," I said automatically, though my voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. "Yours?" "Good," she replied, her tone measured. Quiet. We stared at each other for a moment, neither of us speaking. In the silence, I became acutely aware of every detail, the way her sweater hugged her shoulders, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the faint crease between her eyebrows as if she were trying to solve some invisible puzzle. Then, softly, she added, "You seem different today." Different. The word echoed in my mind, sharp and unsettling. Was it that obvious? Did she sense the turmoil brewing beneath my carefully constructed facade? Before I could respond, she stood and headed toward the kitchen. "Dinner's ready whenever you are," she called over her shoulder. I followed her, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever this was, this strange, electric tension, it wasn't going away anytime soon. And deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted it to. The days that followed were a blur of routine punctuated by fleeting, charged moments between Claire and me. It was as if the air in the house had shifted, becoming heavier, charged with an unspoken energy I couldn't quite name. At breakfast, she'd pass me the coffee pot with a soft smile that lingered just a fraction too long. In the evenings, when we crossed paths in the hallway, her gaze would catch mine, and for a heartbeat, it felt like time stood still. These interactions weren't overtly significant, just small exchanges, but they left me unsettled, my thoughts spiraling into territory I wasn't ready to confront. At work, I tried to distract myself by burying myself in projects. My desk became a fortress of sticky notes, sketches, and half-empty coffee cups, but no matter how hard I focused, my mind kept drifting back to her. There was something about the way she moved through the house, deliberate yet unhurried, as though every action carried meaning. Even mundane tasks, watering plants, folding laundry, flipping pages of a book, seemed imbued with a quiet grace that made them impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Sarah cornered me in the break room, her arms crossed and her expression stern. "Okay, spill," she demanded, leaning against the counter. "You've been acting weird all week. What's going on?" "Nothing," I said quickly, avoiding her eyes as I stirred sugar into my tea. "Just tired." She snorted. "Please. You're not fooling anyone. Is it a guy? Or someone else?" She raised an eyebrow suggestively, her tone teasing but probing. I froze, my spoon clinking against the mug. The question hit closer to home than I cared to admit. Was it possible Sarah could sense something? No, I told myself firmly. She didn't know anything. She couldn't. Still, guilt prickled at the edges of my conscience, sharp and insistent. I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. Not a chance. Trust me, my love life is non-existent. Sarah studied me for a moment longer, then shrugged. "All right, fine. But you better snap out of it soon. You're starting to scare people." Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. Scare people? Was I really that transparent? The thought unnerved me, but there was nothing I could do about it. Not without confronting the tangled web of emotions swirling inside me, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. That evening, I arrived home to find Claire sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by stacks of old photo albums. She looked up as I entered, her face lighting up with a sheepish grin. "Oh, hey. I was just organizing some things." I hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to retreat or join her. Curiosity won out. "What are you looking at?" "Family photos," she said, patting the space beside her. "Your dad mentioned he wanted to digitize them, so I figured I'd start sorting through everything." Reluctantly, I sat down next to her, careful to keep a respectable distance. As she flipped open one of the albums, memories spilled across the pages. Birthdays, vacations, holidays. There I was at 10 years old, grinning toothlessly in front of a Christmas tree. At 15, scowling awkwardly during a family portrait session. Seeing those images brought a bittersweet pang. I hadn't realized how much I missed those simpler times until now. Claire turned another page, revealing a picture of my mom. Her smile was radiant, her arm draped casually around Dad's shoulders. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Claire murmured, "She was beautiful." The comment caught me off guard. No one talked about Mom anymore, not really. Dad avoided the subject entirely, and I rarely brought it up unless prompted. Hearing Claire acknowledge her existence felt strange, almost intrusive, but also oddly comforting. "Yeah," I said softly, tracing the edge of the photograph with my finger. "She was." Claire glanced at me, her expression thoughtful. "You look like her, you know. Same eyes." I blinked, surprised by the observation. People often said I took after Dad, inheriting his height and build, but no one had ever compared me to Mom before. The comparison stirred something deep within me, a mix of pride and sorrow that tightened my throat. "Thanks," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. For a while, we sat in companionable silence, flipping through the pages together. Claire pointed out details I hadn't noticed before. The way Mom always tucked her hair behind her ear when she laughed, the tiny scar above her eyebrow from a childhood accident. Each revelation felt like a gift, a piece of her personality brought back to life. By the time we reached the final album, I found myself leaning slightly closer to Claire, drawn in by her stories and insights. When we finally closed the last book, Claire stretched, wincing as her joints cracked audibly. "Well, that was exhausting," she joked, rubbing her neck. "But worth it." "It was," I agreed, surprising myself with the sincerity in my tone. "Thank you for sharing this with me." She smiled, her eyes warm and genuine. "Anytime." As I stood to leave, she called after me. "Hey, Emily?" I turned back, meeting her gaze. "Yeah, maybe we should do this again sometime. Go through more stuff. Together." Her suggestion hung in the air, simple yet loaded with implications. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to embrace the idea of spending more time with her. But another part, the rational, cautious part, warned me to tread carefully. Spending time with Claire outside of our usual dynamic felt dangerous, like stepping onto thin ice. Yet, despite my reservations, I nodded. "Sure. That sounds nice." Her smile widened, and for a brief moment, it felt like the walls between us had cracked ever so slightly, letting in a sliver of light. Over the next few days, our newfound connection continued to grow, albeit tentatively. We began sharing meals more often, lingering over conversations about books, movies, and random bits of trivia. Claire had a dry wit that caught me off guard, making me laugh in ways I hadn't in years. She listened intently when I spoke, her attention unwavering, as if my words mattered more than anything else in the world. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I started opening up to her, not just about trivial things, but about deeper topics. My struggles at work, my fears about the future, even fragments of grief I'd buried long ago. One evening, as we cleared the dinner table together, Claire paused mid-motion, holding a plate in her hands. "Do you ever feel stuck?" she asked suddenly, her voice hesitant. I frowned, setting down the dish I'd been carrying. "What do you mean?" "I don't know." She sighed, placing the plate on the counter. Like you're waiting for something to happen, but you're not sure what it is. Like life is passing you by, and you're just standing still." Her words resonated deeply, striking a chord I hadn't realized existed. "Yeah," I admitted quietly. "All the time." We locked eyes, and in that moment, I saw a reflection of my own longing mirrored in hers. Whatever she was searching for, whatever void she was trying to fill, it wasn't so different from mine. The realization sent a shiver down my spine, equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. Later that night, as I lay in bed replaying our conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was brewing beneath the surface. Claire wasn't just my stepmother. She was a kindred spirit, someone who understood the weight of invisible burdens. And as much as I tried to deny it, the pull toward her was growing stronger with each passing day. But understanding that pull, and acknowledging what it meant, was another story entirely. The turning point came unexpectedly during a rainy Saturday afternoon. The storm rolled in suddenly, dark clouds swallowing the sky and sending sheets of rain pounding against the windows. Trapped indoors, I decided to tackle the cluttered attic, a task I'd been putting off for months. Armed with boxes and trash bags, I climbed the creaky stairs, determined to make progress. Halfway through sorting through dusty bins and forgotten relics, I stumbled upon a wooden chest tucked away in the corner. Its lid was warped with age, but the brass latch gleamed faintly in the dim light. Intrigued, I pried it open, revealing a treasure trove of mementos, letters, journals, photographs, all belonging to M.O.M.'d. My hands trembled as I sifted through the contents, memories flooding back in waves. One item in particular caught my eye, a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. I opened it cautiously, scanning the pages filled with her elegant handwriting. The entries ranged from mundane observations about daily life to profound reflections on love, loss, and identity. Reading them felt like having a conversation with her, one last chance to hear her voice. Tears blurred my vision as I flipped through the pages, clutching the journal to my chest. I didn't notice Claire standing in the doorway until she spoke. "Emily, Are you okay? I wiped my cheeks hastily, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable state.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Just found some old stuff. She stepped closer, her brow furrowed with concern. When she saw the journal in my hands, recognition flickered across her face.
Oh,
That's your mom's, isn't it? I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Without hesitation, Claire knelt beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. It's okay to miss her, she said gently. To grieve her. You don't have to carry it alone. Her touch was light, barely noticeable, but it sent a jolt of electricity coursing through me. For the first time in years, I let myself cry openly, leaning into her embrace as sobs racked my body. She held me silently, stroking my hair and murmuring reassurances until the storm outside began to subside. When the tears finally slowed, I pulled away, Morty. The days following that rainy afternoon in the attic felt different, as though an invisible barrier between Claire and me had dissolved. We moved through the house with a newfound ease, our interactions tinged with something softer, more intimate. Yet, beneath this growing closeness lurked a tension I couldn't ignore, a pull toward her that was both exhilarating and terrifying. It wasn't just the way she smiled at me now, or how her hand sometimes lingered on mine when passing the salted dinner. It was deeper than that, rooted in moments where words weren't necessary but meaning hung heavy in the AIRAT work. My focus wavered more than ever. Colleagues noticed. Sarah especially kept giving me sidelong glances during meetings, her eyebrows raised in silent inquiry. You're zoning out again, she whispered one morning as we reviewed mock-ups for a client campaign. Sorry, I muttered, forcing myself to concentrate on the designs spread across the table. But even as I nodded along to her feedback, my mind drifted back to Claire, to the warmth of her arm around me in the attic, the steadiness of her voice as she told me it was okay to grieve. Those memories were vivid, almost tactile, and they made it impossible to focus on anything else. By Friday evening, I was exhausted, not from the workload, but from the constant effort of compartmentalizing my emotions. When I got home, Claire was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She glanced up as I entered, her smile lighting up the room. Hey, you look beat. Rough week. You could say that, I replied, dropping my bag by the door and leaning against the counter. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the air, grounding me momentarily. How about you? Anything exciting happen? She shrugged, continuing her task with practiced precision. Not really. Just teaching classes, grading papers, the usual. Her tone was casual, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Hesitation, maybe, or curiosity. After a pause, she added, Actually, I've been thinking about what you said the other day. About feeling stuck. My stomach tightened. I hadn't expected her to bring it up again, let alone so soon.
oh,
Yeah. She set the knife down and turned to face me fully, her expression serious. I think everyone feels that way sometimes. Like life is moving forward, but you're standing still, watching it pass you by. Her words hit too close to home, echoing thoughts I'd tried to bury. I crossed my arms defensively, avoiding her gaze. It's not like I can just snap my fingers and fix everything. I know, she said softly, but maybe you don't have to do it alone. The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. For a moment, I wanted to believe her, to trust that she truly understood what I was going through. But doubt crept in quickly, whispering warnings about boundaries and consequences. This was Claire, my stepmother. Whatever connection we shared, however real it felt, couldn't erase the fact that crossing certain lines would change everything irreversibly. We stood there in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between us. Finally, I cleared my throat and forced a smile. Thanks. That means a lot. She nodded, returning to her cooking, but the tension remained palpable. Dinner that night was subdued, our conversation skirting around unspoken topics. By the time we finished eating, I retreated to my room, desperate for solitude. That weekend, I threw myself into cleaning and organizing, hoping physical activity might distract me from the storm brewing inside. But no matter how many shelves I dusted or drawers I emptied, Claire's presence lingered in every corner of the house. It was maddening and intoxicating. On Sunday morning, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The crisp autumn air stung my cheeks as I wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood, leaves crunching underfoot. My thoughts spiraled endlessly. What did Claire mean when she said I didn't have to face things alone? Was she offering friendship, support, or something more? And if it was something more, what did that say about me? About us? Lost in thought, I barely registered the sound of footsteps behind me until a familiar voice called out, "Emily, wait up." I turned to see Claire jogging toward me, her breath visible in puffs of white vapor. She wore a loose sweater and jeans, her hair tied back in a messy bun. Despite the chill, she looked radiant, her cheeks flushed from exertion. "What are you doing here?" I asked, startled. "I saw you leave and figured you might want some company," she said, falling into step beside me. "Hope you don't mind." "No, it's fine," I replied, though my pulse quickened at her proximity. Walking together felt natural, yet charged with an undercurrent of anticipation. Every brush of her arm against mine sent sparks racing along my skin. For a while, we walked in companionable silence, the rhythm of our steps syncing effortlessly. Then Claire spoke, her voice hesitant. "Can I ask you something?"
Sure.
"Do you ever wonder what it would be like to start over? To leave behind everything holding you back and just begin again?" Her question blindsided me. Start over? The idea seemed ludicrous, impossible. How could anyone simply erase years of baggage and expectations? Yet, as I considered her words, a part of me wondered if she was speaking from experience, if she, too, carried burdens she longed to escape. "I guess I haven't thought about it much," I admitted. "It sounds nice, though, in theory." "It does," she agreed, her tone wistful. "But it's scary, too. Leaving behind what you know, even if it's painful, it takes courage." We stopped at a park bench overlooking a small pond, its surface rippling gently in the breeze. Claire sat down, patting the space beside her. Reluctantly, I joined her, keeping a careful distance. As we watched ducks paddle lazily across the water, she continued, "Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Like I've been playing a role for so long that I forgot who I am underneath." Her confession startled me. Claire had always seemed so composed, so self-assured. Hearing her admit vulnerability shook something loose within me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. "Because," she hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Because I think you understand. Maybe better than anyone else." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Did she mean what I thought she meant? Or was I reading too much into her honesty? Either way, the weight of her admission pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. "I don't know what to say," I confessed finally, my voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything," she replied, turning to meet my gaze. Her eyes were bright, searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could give. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "That you won't shut me out." "Not completely." Her request pierced straight through my defenses, leaving me raw and exposed. How could I promise that when I wasn't even sure I trusted myself around her? Still, I nodded, unable to deny her plea. "Okay, I promise." Satisfied, she offered a small smile and stood, brushing leaves from her sweater.
Come on.
"Let's head back before it gets dark." As we walked home, side by side, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. Whatever walls remained were thinner now, fragile enough to crumble with the slightest push. And while part of me feared what lay beyond them, another part yearned to break free, to step into the unknown and see where it led. Back at the house, Claire disappeared upstairs to change, leaving me alone in the living room. I sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the television without turning it on. My mind raced, replaying fragments of our conversation, her questions, her confessions, her plea for connection. Each word felt like a thread pulling me closer to her, unraveling the carefully constructed barriers I'd built around my heart. When Claire reappeared, dressed in sweatpants and a hoodie, She paused in the doorway, studying me with a mixture of concern and determination. "Are you all right?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I feel confused." She sat beside me, close enough that our knees touched. "About what?" "Us," I blurted out before I could stop myself. Heat flooded my cheeks as I realized what I'd said. "I mean, about everything." To my surprise, she didn't recoil or deflect. Instead, she reached out, placing a gentle hand on mine. "Me too," she murmured. "But maybe confusion isn't such a bad thing. Sometimes, it's the first step toward clarity." Her touch sent a jolt of electricity coursing through me, sharp and undeniable. I wanted to pull away, to maintain the illusion of control, but I couldn't. Not anymore. Slowly, tentatively, I turned my hand over, lacing my fingers through hers. Her grip tightened slightly, reassuring and steady. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The world outside faded away, leaving only the two of us suspended in a bubble of possibility. Fear and desire warred within me, each vying for dominance. But as I looked into Claire's eyes, I realized something crucial. Whatever happened next, whatever risks we took, we wouldn't face them alone, and maybe, just maybe, that was worth everything. The days that followed our quiet confession in the living room were a blur of heightened awareness and unspoken tension. Every glance, every accidental brush of hands, felt electric, charged with the weight of what we'd admitted but hadn't yet named. Claire and I tiptoed around each other, neither willing to push too far too fast, yet unable to retreat into the comfortable distance we'd once maintained. It was as if we were standing on opposite sides of a precipice, staring across at one another. Knowing that stepping forward would change everything, work, my focus continued to falter. Mock-ups blurred before my eyes, deadlines loomed like storm clouds, and Sarah's increasingly pointed questions about my distracted state only added to my stress. "You're not yourself lately," she remarked during lunch one afternoon, her tone laced with concern. "Is something going on? You can talk to me, you know." I forced a smile, stirring my soup absent-mindedly. "It's nothing. Just life stuff." "Life stuff?" She arched an eyebrow skeptically. "Come on, Em. You've been acting weird for weeks. If it's a guy or anyone, you can tell me. I won't judge." Her words struck a nerve, not because they were accusatory, but because they were so close to the truth. How could I explain what I barely understood myself? That the person occupying my thoughts wasn't some distant crush or fleeting fling, but someone who lived under the same roof, someone whose presence was both comforting and excruciating, someone who happened to be my stepmother. "It's complicated," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Isn't it always?" By Friday evening, the strain of keeping everything bottled up became unbearable. When I arrived home, Claire was in the kitchen preparing dinner, her movements calm and deliberate. The scent of roasted vegetables and herbs filled the air, grounding me momentarily. For a brief second, I considered retreating to my room and avoiding her altogether, but then she turned, catching my eye, and the resolve melted away. "Hey," she greeted softly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "How was your day?" "Long," I replied, setting my bag down by the counter. "Yours?" "Not bad." She hesitated, studying me closely. "You look tired." "I feel tired." My laugh was brittle, hollow. "Honestly, I don't even know where to start." Claire set the towel aside and stepped closer, her expression softening. "Start wherever you need to."
I'm listening.
Her offer undid me. All week, I'd been holding onto fragments of thoughts and emotions, afraid to let them spill out. But now, faced with her steady gaze and open demeanor, the dam broke. Words tumbled out in a rush, about the guilt I carried for feeling this way, the fear of ruining what little stability I had left, the confusion over whether any of it mattered in the grand scheme of things. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I confessed, my voice cracking. "But I also can't keep pretending like none of this exists. Like we don't exist." Claire reached out, placing a hand on my arm. Her touch was light, almost hesitant, but it anchored me. "You're not alone in this," she said gently. "I feel it too, the pull, the uncertainty. And yes, maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's reckless. But denying it doesn't make it go away." Her admission hit me like a wave, knocking the breath from my lungs. Hearing her acknowledge the connection between us validated everything I'd been struggling to articulate. Yet, it also brought a fresh wave of panic. What did this mean for us? For Dad? For the fragile balance we'd built together? What do we do? I asked, my voice trembling. Where do we go from here? She shook her head, her eyes searching mine. I don't have all the answers, but I think we owe it to ourselves to figure it out. Together. The simplicity of her response disarmed me. There was no grand plan, no promise of resolution, just a shared willingness to navigate the unknown. And somehow, that made it easier to breathe. That night, after dinner, we found ourselves sitting side by side on the couch, the television casting flickering shadows across the room. Neither of us spoke. Instead, we sat in companionable silence, our shoulders brushing lightly. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming, yet strangely peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I felt grounded. Not because I had clarity, but because I wasn't facing the chaos alone. Eventually, Claire broke the silence. "Do you remember when you were little and you used to climb into bed with your dad whenever there was a thunderstorm?" I nodded, smiling faintly at the memory.
Yeah.
He'd let me stay until the storm passed, and then he'd carry me back to my room. "He told me about that once," she said, her voice warm with nostalgia. "He said it made him realize how much courage you had, even as a kid, facing your fears head-on, even when they scared you." Her words caught me off guard. Courage?
Me?
The idea seemed laughable given how much I'd been second-guessing myself lately. But Claire's gaze was unwavering, filled with a conviction that made it hard to argue. "You have courage too," I murmured, surprising myself with the sincerity in my tone. "Admitting how you feel, it takes strength." She smiled, though there was a hint of sadness behind it. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just desperation. Sometimes, you reach a point where pretending isn't an option anymore." Her honesty resonated deeply, striking a chord I hadn't realized existed. We were alike in ways I hadn't fully appreciated before, both carrying burdens we couldn't unload, both yearning for something more without knowing exactly what that looked like. And perhaps that shared vulnerability was what bound us together, pulling us closer despite the risks. As the hours ticked by, we lingered in the living room, talking about everything and nothing. Claire recounted stories from her childhood, her love of painting, her struggles with self-doubt, the reasons she'd chosen yoga as a career. In turn, I opened up about my own insecurities, my dreams of traveling the world, the pressure I felt to live up to expectations I didn't even understand. Each revelation brought us closer, chipping away at the remaining walls between us. When midnight rolled around, exhaustion finally caught up with us. Claire yawned, stretching her arms above her head. "We should probably call it a night." "Yeah," I agreed reluctantly, rising from the couch. As I turned to leave, she caught my wrist, stopping me in my tracks. "Emily," she said softly, her grip firm yet gentle. "Thank you for trusting me." Her gratitude caught me off guard, bringing tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, "for being here." For a moment, we stood frozen, our gazes locked. Then, slowly, tentatively, she leaned in, closing the gap between us. Her lips brushed mine, a featherlight touch that sent shockwaves rippling through my body. Time seemed to stop, the world narrowing to the space between us. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, her breathing uneven. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't have." "No," I interrupted, cupping her face in my hands. "Don't apologize." And then, without thinking, I kissed her again. This time, there was no hesitation, no restraint. Our mouths moved together in a dance of longing and release, years of pent-up emotion pouring out in waves. Her arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer, and I surrendered completely, letting myself drown in the sensation of her warmth, her scent, her presence. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, reality came crashing back. Guilt and doubt clawed at the edges of my mind, whispering warnings about consequences and boundaries. But as I looked into Claire's eyes, shimmering with tears and desire, I realized something crucial. Whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges or heartbreaks awaited us, it was worth it. Because in that moment, with her arms around me and her heartbeat syncing with mine, I felt truly alive. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, painting golden streaks across the bedroom floor. I woke to find Claire curled beside me, her breathing soft and steady. Memories of the previous night flooded back, leaving me dizzy with a mix of joy and apprehension. What had we done? What did it mean? And most importantly, where did we go from here? As if sensing my unease, Claire stirred, blinking sleepily. "Good morning," she murmured, her voice husky with rest. "Morning," I replied, my throat tight with emotion. "Last night, was it real?" She smiled, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "It was. And it's okay to be scared.
But don't run from this, Emily.
Not yet." Her reassurance steadied me, giving me the courage to face whatever came next. Whatever doubts lingered, whatever fears haunted us, we would confront them together. Because in the end, that was all that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The morning after changed everything and nothing. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft patterns on the walls, but the air in the house felt heavier, charged with a new kind of energy. Claire and I moved cautiously around each other, exchanging glances that carried unspoken questions and fragile promises. Neither of us mentioned what had happened the night before, not outright, but it lingered between us like a third presence, impossible to ignore. Breakfast was quiet, almost painfully so. The clink of silverware against plates echoed louder than usual, filling the silence we both seemed reluctant to break. Claire sipped her coffee slowly, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her mug, while I pushed scrambled eggs around my plate, appetite curiously absent. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and measured. "About last night, my heart skipped a beat."
Yeah.
"I don't regret it," she said firmly, meeting my eyes. "But we need to talk about what happens next." Her words sent a jolt of anxiety coursing through me. Talking meant facing reality, the tangled web of consequences, expectations, and responsibilities that came with crossing this line. Part of me wanted to bury my head in the sand, to pretend we could exist in a bubble where none of those things mattered. But Claire's expression was resolute, demanding honesty even if it hurt. "I know," I admitted, setting my fork down. "It's just overwhelming." "It is," she agreed, her tone softer now. "For both of us. But ignoring it won't make it go away." She was right, of course. Avoidance had been my default for years, shutting out emotions, sidestepping difficult conversations, pretending I could handle everything on my own. Yet here I was, sitting across from someone who refused to let me retreat into that familiar pattern. It was terrifying and oddly liberating. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How do we figure this out without ruining everything?" Claire sighed, leaning back in her chair. Her fingers drummed lightly against the table, betraying a nervousness she rarely showed. "I don't have all the answers. But I think the first step is being honest with ourselves and with each other. About what we want, about what we're willing to risk." Her suggestion hung in the air, heavy with implication. What did I want? The answer felt simultaneously clear and impossibly complicated. I wanted her warmth, her understanding, the way she made me feel seen in ways no one else ever had. But wanting her also meant confronting the moral ambiguity of our situation, the potential fallout not just for us but for everyone else caught in its wake. "What about Dad?" I blurted out, the question bursting forth before I could stop it. How do we explain this to him? Or do we even try? Claire flinched visibly, her shoulders tensing at the mention of my father. For a moment, she looked away, staring out the window as if searching for an escape. When she finally turned back, her expression was pained but determined. "Your dad loves you," And he loves me, or at least he thinks he does. But this, whatever it is between us, it's not something we can hide forever. Eventually, he'll find out. And when he does, her voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, but loaded with unspoken fears. My stomach churned at the thought of hurting him, of shattering the fragile sense of normalcy we'd worked so hard to rebuild after Mom's death. He wasn't perfect, far from it, but he deserved better than to be blindsided by betrayal. Didn't he? We can't keep living like this, I said finally, my voice shaking. Pretending everything's fine while hiding how we really feel. It's not fair to him or to us. No, it's not, Claire agreed, reaching across the table to take my hand. Her touch was grounding, steadying me amidst the storm of conflicting emotions. But rushing into anything isn't the solution either. We need time to figure this out, to decide what we're willing to fight for and what we're prepared to lose. Her pragmatism surprised me. In moments of vulnerability, Claire often revealed layers of strength and wisdom I hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just the quiet, reserved woman who kept the household running smoothly. She was someone capable of navigating complexity with grace and resolve. That realization only deepened my admiration for her and my fear of losing her. Later that afternoon, I found myself wandering aimlessly through the neighborhood, trying to clear my head. The crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks, and leaves crunched underfoot as I walked without direction. Every step felt like a tug-of-war between hope and dread, desire and guilt. How could something so wrong feel so right? And how could I reconcile the person I wanted to be with the choices I was making? As I rounded a corner, I spotted Sarah sitting on a bench outside a cafe, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I approached, her face lighting up with surprise. "Emily, fancy running into you." "Hey," I replied, forcing a smile. "Mind if I join you?" "Of course not." She scooted over, patting the space beside her. "What brings you out here?" "Just needed some fresh air," I said vaguely, sinking onto the bench. "How about you?" "Same, actually. Work's been insane lately, and I figured a walk might help clear my head." We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching people pass by. Then, out of nowhere, Sarah turned to me, her expression serious. "You've been acting weird for weeks, Em. Is everything okay?" Her question caught me off guard, though I shouldn't have been surprised. Sarah had always been perceptive, quick to notice when something was off. Still, answering honestly felt impossible. How could I explain the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me without revealing too much? "I'm fine," I lied automatically, avoiding her gaze. "Just dealing with some stuff." "Stuff?" She arched an eyebrow skeptically. "Come on, spill. You know you can trust me."
Trust.
The word hit like a punch to the gut. Could I trust her? Could I trust anyone with the truth about Claire and me? Even thinking about it made my chest tighten with panic. Yet, keeping it bottled up was suffocating, a weight I couldn't carry alone. "I met someone," I confessed haltingly, choosing my words carefully. "Someone unexpected." Sarah's eyes widened, curiosity sparking in their depths. "Unexpected how?" "They're complicated," I hedged, my voice trembling. "And it's not exactly conventional." Her brow furrowed, but she didn't press further. Instead, she placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Listen, I don't need details if you're not ready to share. But whatever it is, you deserve happiness, Emily. Don't let fear or guilt hold you back from finding it." Her words struck a chord, resonating deeply despite their simplicity. Happiness. Was that what I was chasing with Claire? Or was it something darker, more selfish, a fleeting escape from loneliness and longing? Either way, Sarah's support gave me a sliver of courage, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this mess. By the time I returned home, dusk had fallen, casting long shadows across the yard. Claire was in the kitchen, washing dishes, her movements slow and deliberate. She glanced up as I entered, offering a tentative smile.
"Hey."
"How was your walk?" "It helped," I admitted, leaning against the counter. "Cleared my head a little." "That's good." She dried her hands on a towel and turned to face me fully. "Did you come to any conclusions?" Not really, I said with a rueful laugh. But I realized something important.
Oh,
I realized I don't want to run anymore. I confessed, my voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface.
from this.
From us. Whatever happens next, I want to face it together. Claire's expression softened, relief and gratitude mingling in her eyes. That's all I wanted to hear, she murmured, stepping closer. Because I don't want to run either. Her arms wrapped around me then, pulling me into a tight embrace. I buried my face in her shoulder, inhaling the faint scent of lavender and soap that clung to her skin. In that moment, surrounded by her warmth and certainty, the world outside faded away. All that mattered was the two of us, standing together on the edge of uncertainty, ready to leap into the unknown. That night, as we lay side by side in bed, Claire traced gentle circles on my arm, her touch soothing yet electric. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she whispered, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "But I think we'll figure it out. Together." Her lips curved into a small, hopeful smile. "Together," she echoed softly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever storms awaited us, we would weather them. Not because we had all the answers, but because we had each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to see us through. Said nothing, her gaze dropping to the floor as if she were wrestling with the weight of my words. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with a mixture of guilt and resolve. "She's right," Claire murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Love shouldn't hurt the people we care about. But sometimes it does anyway." Her admission hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. It was as though she'd given voice to the fear that had been gnawing at both of us, the knowledge that no matter how carefully we tread, someone would inevitably get hurt. The question wasn't if, it was who. "I don't want to lose him," I confessed, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes.
Dad.
"He's already been through so much. Losing Mom, remarrying you, trying to keep this family together. If he finds out about us, it'll destroy him." Claire stepped closer, her hands reaching for mine. Her touch was grounding, steadying me even as her own vulnerability showed through. "I don't want to lose him either," she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "He's a good man. A kind man. And I never wanted to betray his trust. But Emily," she paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "What we have, it's real. I can't pretend it isn't. And I don't think you can either." Her words hit like a tidal wave, pulling me under their truth. Denial had been our shield for so long, but now it felt impossible to cling to. What Claire and I shared wasn't just fleeting attraction or misplaced affection. It was something deeper, more profound. Something neither of us could walk away from without leaving pieces of ourselves behind. "But what do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How do we protect him, and us, at the same time?" Claire shook her head, her grip tightening on my hands. "I don't know. Maybe there's no perfect answer. All I know is that running away won't fix anything. Hiding won't make this go away." Her honesty was brutal but necessary, forcing me to confront the reality of our situation. We couldn't outrun the truth forever, but facing it meant risking everything. The next morning, Dad's return loomed over us like an approaching storm. Claire busied herself with last-minute preparations, rearranging furniture and stocking the fridge as if creating order in the house might somehow impose order on our lives. I tried to help, but every task felt mechanical, my mind elsewhere. By mid-afternoon, the tension between us was palpable, each glance an accidental brush of hands charged with unspoken fears. As evening fell, the sound of Dad's car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of panic through me. Claire froze in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. For a moment, neither of us moved, the silence stretching taut like a wire ready to snap. Then the front door opened, and Dad's cheerful voice filled the house. "Hey, girls. I'm home." Claire forced a smile, stepping forward to greet him. "Welcome back. How was your trip?" "Long," he replied, setting his suitcase down and pulling her into a hug. "But worth it to see you too." When he turned to me, his grin widened, and he enveloped me in a bear hug that smelled faintly of cologne and airport coffee. "Missed you, kiddo." "I missed you too," I said, my voice catching slightly. Guilt clawed at me as I hugged him back, knowing the secret I was keeping. Over dinner, Dad regaled us with stories from his business trip, his energy infectious and oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface. Claire laughed at all the right moments, her performance flawless, while I picked at my food, struggling to keep up appearances. Every joke he told, every story he shared, felt like a reminder of the life we were jeopardizing. After dessert, Dad leaned back in his chair, surveying the two of us with a satisfied smile. "Feels good to be home. You guys did great holding down the fort while I was gone." Claire nodded, her expression calm but strained. "We managed." Dad chuckled, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You always do." The gesture, a simple, affectionate touch, sent a pang of guilt coursing through me. Watching him interact with Claire, seeing the love and trust in his eyes, made the weight of our deception feel unbearable. How could we sit here, pretending everything was fine, when the foundation of his happiness rested on a lie? Later that night, after Dad retired to bed, Claire and I found ourselves alone in the living room. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of floorboards settling. We sat side by side on the couch, neither of us speaking, the silence thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Claire broke it. "This isn't going to work," she said softly, her voice tinged with resignation. "Pretending, hiding, it's not sustainable." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I know, but what choice do we have?" "We tell him," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon, before this eats us alive." Her suggestion sent a shockwave through me. Telling Dad meant exposing everything, our feelings, our actions, the betrayal we'd kept hidden for weeks. It meant risking his anger, his disappointment, the potential collapse of the fragile family dynamic we'd worked so hard to rebuild. Yet, as terrifying as the idea was, it also felt inevitable. Like a wound left untreated, our secret would fester until it consumed us entirely. "Are you sure?" I asked, searching her face for any sign of doubt. "No," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I don't see another way. Do you?" I shook my head, tears spilling down my cheeks.
No.
"I don't." Claire pulled me into her arms, holding me tightly as I cried. Her embrace was both comforting and heartbreaking, a reminder of everything we stood to lose, and everything we refused to let go of. For the first time since this began, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge the enormity of what we were doing. Loving Claire wasn't just an act of rebellion or defiance, it was an act of courage. Courage to face the unknown, to risk everything for something real. And though the road ahead promised pain and uncertainty, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't turn back now.